This is the Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brewski.
Tell you what, every time you think you're getting somewhere in the Delphi murder case, you're finding more evidence and more rabbit holes to go down. You suddenly discover another 20 rabbit holes down that rabbit hole. There are so many things in this case that were not investigated properly. Investigations just stopped. They were turned the other way. They said, we got nothing more here, in spite of loads of evidence. One of the big pieces in this whole story involves a character by the name of Keegan Klein. And we're going to be focusing on him in this episode of the program. And I want to show you something one of you guys recently sent to me. One of our sleuths out there sent me this. And this is, I'm going to show you something from his Facebook page. Let me give you a quick background on Keegan Klein. And I'll go into great detail in a moment. But before you see this, he is the guy who was communicating online, the last known person to communicate with Libby German before the murders. How was he communicating with her? Not as a friend. No, as a child predator. Someone who was trying to allegedly lure her to go and meet up the day she was murdered. And where did he want to meet up, allegedly? The Monon High Bridge. Yeah. So there's that. But he's never been charged with anything in this crime. He's been charged with many other crimes involving child pornography, and he's serving 40 years in prison now for that. But he's a key player in all of this, denies being involved in any way, shape, or form, despite being the guy that's trying to lure her to the bridge the day she's murdered. Nothing to see here. And he's also the guy who on his Facebook page posted this. All right, okay, what is this? Is there anything to see here? Well, let's break this down a little bit. Keegan Klein has these alter egos, these fake personalities that he was using to try and lure people to him, because he's a really disgusting looking human being and a really disgusting person on the inside and the outside. So he has to get behind these fake personas to have anybody have any interest in him whatsoever. So one of these is a music artist. He's claiming that he's in these bands and he's dropping these records and all this stuff, and it's all BS. It's just all completely made up. But on his Facebook page, he posts this. Now, what's significant about this? Well, he drops this on his Facebook page roughly a year after the murders, and you can see the date right up there. Okay, so it's roughly a year. And then the graphic itself. Got his name up there, Keegan Klein, and then there's a white rose in the middle of the graphic with a black backdrop. And then we see the date 12/27. Now, on the surface, one could go, oh, is that the album drop date? That's what one would think. It also happens to be Libby German's birthday. And the white roses represent innocence, purity. No, Libby German was a little girl. So one could easily think of her that way, especially if you're a child predator and wanting to take that from someone. White rose, the word rose on this graphic. And the other side, it literally says Rose, in case you're listening. That's also Liberty's middle name. Liberty Rose German. So there's that. Suspicious, weird. Is it a tribute to this young girl who lost her life about a year before he posted this? Or is this some sort of sadistic look at me, haha, you won't figure me out type way of posting? Because he's kind of an idiot. It's kind of weird. It's kind of creepy. It's really weird and it's really creepy. And we're going to go into the whole story of Keegan Klein here in just a moment. I want to show you one other creepy thing that has been sent to me recently. And you may have seen this before. I may just be playing catch up and have missed some of these things because I don't really go into the Reddits and all of that. This is an image I'm going to show you here. And I want to contextualize it as well. You know, they were saying, the authorities in Delphi were saying, oh, you know, we put those composite sketches out there, but obviously Richard Allen doesn't look like any of them. So who could it be? Well, we could never figure out. We could never figure out who those sketches looked like. Really? Because a lot of other people did. What you see on the screen here, if you're watching us on YouTube and if you're listening to us, please go check out our YouTube channel, Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi, and you can see the video version of all of these, is the half and half composite sketches of what witnesses or who witnesses say they saw out there that day. And it's faces divided. You have one half the composite sketch, the other half an actual photo of some individuals who were alleged to have been seen out there that day. On opposite ends is Keegan Klein. That's Keegan there. That's Keegan there. The middle, Anthony Klein, his dad. Again, none of them have been charged with anything in this case. But, you know, if you're looking for somebody that looks like the composite sketches that other hikers said, hey, here's who I saw, you might have a few folks right there because none of them look like Richard Allen. So there's that. Let's get into our story. The last person, the very last person known to have contact with Liberty German before her murder was not Richard Allen. It was Keegan Klein. That fact alone should have made Klein the prime focus of the Delphi murders investigation. It should have led to immediate scrutiny, a deep dive into his digital history, and a race to uncover whether his communication with Liberty was more than just another online interaction. But instead, law enforcement sat on that information, let it collect a little dust, finally age, for 3 years, while they chased dead-end leads and ignored the most damning piece of evidence that they had from the very start, a direct link between Keegan Klein and one of the victims. Liberty German wasn't just a random teenager scrolling through social media. She was being groomed. She'd been targeted by a predator hiding behind a fake online persona, a predator who was actively manipulating multiple underage girls at the time, including her. And on February 13th, 2017, the day she and Abby Williams disappeared, that predator's profile was Anthony Schatz, and it was still active. It turns out it was Keegan Klein. Yeah. The name Anthony Schatz. The Anthony part makes me wonder a little because his dad's name is Anthony. And there have been some transcripts out there that show some interesting accusations that Keegan has made that maybe other people were using that profile as well. Let's be absolutely clear, though. Keegan Klein was not just some guy who happened to know Liberty. He was the last confirmed person to be in contact with her before she was murdered. That alone should have made a massive red flag go up on the part of investigators. That also should have put a spotlight on him immediately, but the police didn't act. Not in 2017, not in 2018, not even 2019. Even though they knew that this guy is catfishing children. Just let him do his thing. By the time they finally got around to interrogating him in 2020, it wasn't even because of Liberty German. It was because of an entirely different child exploitation case. Yeah. They finally get around to this guy. Keegan Klein. Again, nothing to see here. So here's a question that has never been answered. Why did law enforcement ignore the strongest lead they ever had? And that's just one of the many strong leads. There's Ron Logan, too. Bridge guy. But we're not getting into that one on this video. There's too much to unpack about Keegan Klein here. If you want to see the Ron Logan ones, we got them on our channel. Check it out. And while we're at this moment, I want to ask you to press subscribe wherever you're listening to this, or if you're on YouTube, hit the button, hit the bell, hit whatever you need to hit on whatever platform it is so you don't miss any of our coverage on this case, because we will continue to dive through this and wade through this until actual justice is served, because God knows it's not the guy that got locked up. There's no way around it. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a failure to investigate logic. A known predator, already under scrutiny for his involvement in online exploitation, had direct access to one of the victims just before she was murdered, and yet he was treated as an afterthought. Meanwhile, Richard Allen, a man who had no digital connection to the victims at all, was charged and convicted. And now, with Allen locked up, Keegan Klein has slipped into the background of this case again. And if his role into it no longer matters, well, I guess that may be what some think, but I think we need to bring back a little light here, get the spotlight out, get the big flashlight out, and go, I think we need to look back over here, guys, because I don't know how you didn't do it in the first place. Unless, of course, nobody wants to admit they're wrong, nobody wants to admit they haven't figured anything out, or we're protecting somebody. I don't think you're protecting Keegan Klein. His name never should have left the conversation in the first place. So let's talk about what police actually knew. From the moment Liberty's phone was examined in 2017, investigators saw it, the Anthony Shots profile, actively messaging her. The account had been used to flirt, manipulate, and engage with young girls, convincing them to send explicit photos. This isn't speculation. Klein admitted to creating the account. He admitted to using stolen images of a male model to catfish minors because, I mean, look at him. Do you think that's going to catfish anybody? You think it's going to get a normal human being? Gee, you don't look like a child predator at all. He admitted that his goal was to lure girls into trusting him so he could get exactly what he wanted. And Liberty was one of his targets. This wasn't a vague connection. It wasn't just a name in a chat log. This was an active online predator who had direct access to one of the victims at the exact time she went missing. And yet, despite having all of this evidence in their hands, law enforcement took 3 years before they even questioned Klein about Delphi. What exactly were they waiting for? The truth is, it is very hard to understand how police justified ignoring this lead. And now someone say, well, they did ignore it. They did look in. Yeah, they did. They did eventually look into him. And then what? I don't know. If you're the one that's catfishing one of the girls who dies and you talk about going and meeting her the day she dies, at the place she dies, I would think that might be probable cause for an arrest. Just saying. It wasn't just one red flag, it was a flashing neon sign, and yet no immediate action was taken. No arrest, no raid of Klein's home, no deep dive into his digital records until 2020, when an entirely different case forced them to finally act. And when they finally got around to questioning him about Liberty, he lied. Surprise. Over and over, Klein denied knowing anything. He claimed he didn't remember their conversation. He said he blocked her because she was annoying. You know, those annoying girls that are underage that you're catfishing, they're just annoying. I just want to block them. I don't want to prey on them like I'm actively doing right now. He called the idea that they were supposed to meet up a total lie, even though the chat logs suggest otherwise. And the police let him walk out of that room without a single charge related to Delphi. Just took him at his word. For 3 years, law enforcement had ignored Keegan Klein. And when they finally sat him down and confronted him with fact, with truth, with chat logs, and he says, it's not real. It's a lie. Or whatever BS spewed out of his mouth, they still didn't do anything about it. To protect and serve over there in Delphi, right? You got a great force. Instead, they turned their attention to someone else, a man with no digital footprint in Liberty's life at all. A man who wasn't even on their radar for the first 5 years of the investigation. A man who actually raised his hand at the beginning of this when the girls they found dead, and they said, "Who was out here hiking today? Please call us with any information you have, with anything that you know. What did you see? Even if you think it's just completely benign, just tell us what was your experience like out there that day." And you know who raised his hand? Richard Allen. He said, "Yeah, I'm a dad. I'm a father. I work over here at CVS. A lot of people know me. How can I help?" You know, like child killers do. They always raise their hand and go, "Hey, I was there that day." Somehow, to Delphi, that was, this must be the guy. Oh, wait, that took them another 6 years when they ran out of other leads. Or they just stopped pursuing real ones or pretended that they didn't exist. Then they went after Richard Allen and convicted him with little to no evidence. A man whose only physical connection to the crime scene was a single bullet. And by the way, the crime was not committed with a bullet. There's no evidence that a gun was even shown to the girls. There's nothing involving a gun in this case. But they found a single bullet on the trampled crime scene that they let all these people go through. All these people trampling through, officers, volunteers, many people with guns. So after 40 to 60 or more people wander through this crime scene, somebody finds a bullet on the ground, an unspent bullet. Who might that belong to? I don't know, any of the 40, 50, 60 or more people who've been trampling through this scene the last 4 days? Maybe we should check all them. Oh, no. 6 years later, we're going to go see if Rick Allen has a gun that maybe would fit this bullet. A very common bullet, by the way, that almost anyone would have if they're a regular gun owner. And they go, "Look, this bullet fits your gun." Can't really prove it. We got this guy who says it might look like it kind of has a marking, even though it's unspent. And the science of this is pretty much bunk. It must be his, because we found that single bullet there, and he has a gun that it could go into. That means it's him. Now, keep in mind, this is a gun-loving community, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. All I'm saying is, if you're going to connect this guy and say this is your guy because of a single bullet, I think you probably would be lining up nearly half of your town if we're going to match bullets here. Or just, again, going back to all the people who trampled through the scene that have guns, where there likely could have been a bullet dropped. Because a CVS guy who went out for a walk didn't have his gun with him. Rick Allen was just out for a walk, and then he raises his hand and said, "How can I help?" But that bullet must be his, so that automatically means he must have killed these girls. Yes, this is their logic, and if you think I'm making that up, dig into this case. This is why we are still talking about it, because they convicted him, and he's in prison now for the next 130 years. Again, he's a dad, he was a pharmacy tech, he was a husband, no criminal history, nothing, nada. No weird search history, no patterns of behavior that would indicate maybe there's some sort of interest in kids or killing or whatever. Nothing. Just a bullet on the ground that fit a gun he owned. So you better be careful if you ever drop a bullet anywhere, because any crimes nearby, near Delphi, you're going to get pinned for it. Or you won't. So here we are, years later, still left with the same unanswered questions. Why was Keegan Klein allowed to slip through the cracks? Because until we have an answer to that, this case is not solved. And it never will be. Keegan Klein wasn't just another suspect in the Delphi murders investigation. He was the only person with a verifiable digital connection to Liberty German before she was killed. He wasn't some mystery figure who vanished into the ether after the crime. He was right there, behind a fake online persona, actively grooming underage girls and talking to Liberty up until the day she disappeared, and denying it under the profile Anthony Shots. Wasn't some throwaway account either. It was a carefully constructed trap designed to lure young, vulnerable girls in. Klein stole photos of a male model, sometimes with sharp features, a perfect jawline, the kind of guy who could pass as an Instagram influencer. He built a fake identity around it, an online persona meant to gain trust, build connections, and exploit children. And for years, that's exactly what he did. When police finally searched Klein's electronic devices in 2020, what they found was horrific. Thousands of explicit images and videos of minors. Thousands of chats between Klein and underage girls. It wasn't just one or two victims, it was a pattern, a system he had perfected. And right there, among all those digital horrors, was Liberty German. She'd been talking to Anthony Shots, not just once, not just in passing. She was actively communicating with Klein's fake account the day before she was murdered. And that was not speculation. That wasn't theory. That was fact. Police knew that Liberty had been speaking to this account. They had the chat logs. They could see the messages. They knew that this was more than some casual conversation. And the most damning detail, the chat logs suggested that Liberty and Anthony Shots had planned to meet up. We're not talking about vague, half-joking exchange. We're talking about something serious enough to be flagged in the investigation. Something that made police believe that Liberty may have been lured to the bridge that day under false pretenses. Think about that for a second. A known predator actively communicating with Liberty German, a meeting may have been planned, and instead of going after that lead immediately, law enforcement sat on this information for years. It was there, or if there was ever a moment where the Delphi investigation completely fell apart, this was it. Because digital records don't lie. There was no reason to hesitate, no reason for police to question whether this was relevant. The second they saw Liberty German's name in the chat logs, the second they saw messages between her and Anthony Shots leading up to the day she vanished, Keegan Klein should have been the #1 priority. But he wasn't. Instead of treating this as a massive lead, as it was, police buried it. They never made a public statement about it in 2017. They never put out warnings about the Anthony Shots profile to see if other victims might come forward. They never once told the public that they were actively investigating a known child predator who had been talking to Liberty the day before she was murdered. For 3 years, nothing happened. Klein remained free. His Anthony Shots account was never linked to the case publicly. The investigation dragged on, cycling through suspects, chasing tips that led nowhere. Unless, of course, you're talking about Ron Logan. But again, that's for another story. While the one person actually connected to Liberty was left untouched, and all the while Klein kept up his act, he kept using Anthony Shots to groom more girls. He continued to build trust with underage victims under the same fake persona, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He wasn't hiding. He was right there, doing exactly what he had been doing when he talked to Liberty. It wasn't until 2020, when Klein was finally arrested for child exploitation, that law enforcement even started to acknowledge his connection to the Delphi case. But by then it was too late. They'd wasted years. And that's why this case still doesn't make sense now. If law enforcement truly believed that Keegan Klein had nothing to do with the murders, then why did they hide the fact that he was talking to one of the victims? If they truly thought Anthony Shots was irrelevant, then why did they wait so long to publicly acknowledge it? And if they did suspect that Klein played a role, then why was he never charged with anything related to the Delphi case? None of this adds up. What we do know is this. The strongest lead in the Delphi murders case was ignored for years, and Liberty German was being manipulated by a known predator. She was communicating with him directly, and police had this evidence from the start. And yet, despite this, Keegan Klein still wasn't the one sitting in the defendant's chair in 2024. And that is a failure that cannot be ignored. By 2017, police had everything they needed to at least treat Keegan Klein as a person of interest. In the Delphi murders, Liberty German's phone gave them the biggest lead in the entire investigation. Her active conversations with Anthony Schott's account leading up to the day she was killed, the fact that she had been talking to his fake profile should have launched an immediate deep dive into the person behind it. But that did not happen. Instead, law enforcement sat on the information for 3 years. And in those 3 years, Keegan Klein was left alone. There were no raids on his home, no early morning knocks on the door, no pressure to explain why his fake account was the last known digital contact with one of the victims. While the police spun their wheels chasing dead-end leads, Klein lived his life like nothing had happened. This wasn't a case of limited technology or difficult trail to follow. The second police pulled Liberty's phone records, they had his profile name. From there, it would have taken not much to trace that account back to its creator, especially considering that Klein wasn't some master criminal hiding behind his tracks. He had been running the same scams and exploiting girls online for years. They should have found him immediately. Instead, investigators chased vague descriptions of possible suspects, sifted through thousands of tips, and wasted time on people with no actual connection to the victims. Remember, they also had the sketch. Again, this doesn't look like anybody. That's no one. There's no one to be seen there. That doesn't match a description. Okay. Meanwhile, Klein continued using Anthony Schott's to target more girls, manipulate them, and collect explicit images, all while law enforcement ignored the most crucial digital trail sitting directly in front of them. He had 3 more years to talk to more victims, free to keep running the same schemes that he had used on Liberty German, free because police had failed to act on the most obvious suspect they had. When they finally did show up at his door in August of 2020, it wasn't because they had finally put 2 and 2 together about the Delphi murders. It was because something else entirely. The FBI wasn't raiding Klein's home because they had uncovered new evidence linking him to Liberty's disappearance. They were there because of a separate child exploitation case. Authorities had been tracking a massive network of online predators, and Klein's name just happened to surface as one of the worst offenders. Surprise! When they executed the warrant, what they found was beyond disturbing. Klein's devices contained over 100,000 images and videos of child pornography, one of the largest collections ever uncovered in the state up to that time. His chat showed those years of grooming, manipulation, and coercion. He had dozens, if not hundreds of victims, and yet somehow, even with that mountain of evidence, law enforcement still hadn't prioritized his connection in Delphi. It was only after his arrest that someone finally decided to ask some questions. Hey, this guy, he was talking to Liberty German right before she was killed. Should we look at that? 3 years. 3 years of evidence sitting untouched. 3 years. And what else did he do in those 3 years that we don't even know about, I guess, is another big question. When they finally did bring him to questioning about Delphi, he just denied everything. Despite his denials being in direct contradiction of the physical evidence they had in front of them, he claimed he didn't remember his conversations with Liberty, conveniently. Said he blocked her because she was annoying. No connection. And because police had wasted so much time, they had no way to prove otherwise. By August of 2020, whatever physical evidence might have connected Klein to the crime scene was long gone. Any electronic evidence that could have tied him to the murders had either been wiped or was now buried under years of new digital activity. The trail was kind of cold, despite it being a burning inferno right after that little cold snap there. You just got to get through it. And that was law enforcement's fault. They had the lead, they had the name, they had the evidence, and they did nothing with it. Remember, I got to say here, Klein's never been charged with anything related to the Delphi murders. So, innocent in the eyes of the law. Keegan Klein was simply arrested for child exploitation, simply, and possession of child pornography. And just like that, the biggest mistake of the investigation was complete. Klein should have been the focus from the very beginning. Instead, he was left untouched for 3 years. By the time police finally got around to questioning him, it was too late to fix their mistake. And yet, they went on. They went on acting as if, did we miss something? Nah, we're all good. They put the evidence in front of him, showed him the digital records, proving that his fake profile was still in use, still messaging, still engaging with underage girls, possibly even Liberty right before she vanished. And Klein had no explanation for this. He didn't even try to offer one. Instead, he just denied everything. Said he didn't remember the chats. He blamed someone else for using his phone. He called the idea that he was supposed to meet up with Liberty a total lie, despite police having chat logs suggesting otherwise. It was a masterclass in dodging accountability, and somehow the police just let him do it. At no point during the interrogation did Klein offer a single believable reason for why his account was still active on the day of Liberty's disappearance. He had no way to explain why he had continued using Anthony's shots, even after he claimed to have blocked her. He had no answer for why chat records suggested a potential meetup. And yet, instead of pressing him harder, instead of calling out his inconsistencies, instead of treating him like the prime suspect he should have been, police backed off. They had him cornered with digital evidence, and they let him control the conversation. They should have dug deeper, demanded real answers, pushed him until he cracked. Instead, they let him wiggle his little way through. I don't know how he'd really get out of anything physically, but, Crisco. At the end of the interrogation, Klein walked out of that room without a single charge related to the Delphi murders. Again, 3 years of sitting on the biggest lead in the case. They finally confront him. They let him walk away. And in doing so, they gave Keegan Klein exactly what he wanted. By September of 2022, Keegan Klein had been sitting in an Indiana jail cell for over 2 years, convicted of child exploitation and awaiting sentencing. The Delphi murders investigation, now 5 years old, had seemingly moved past him. The public focus had shifted, and yet law enforcement wasn't done with him just yet. That month, without warning, investigators descended on the Wabash River near Klein's home in Peru, Indiana. Anyway, this wasn't just a casual search. This was a massive operation. Boats, divers, excavation teams, lots of people combing through the riverbed in what was clearly a hunt for something important. And yet no one ever explained what that something was. For 2 weeks, the search continued. Authorities spent countless hours scouring the river, sifting through debris, dredging up whatever they could find. News helicopters hovered overhead. The public speculated. And then, just as quickly as it started, it was over. And nothing was ever said about it again. What were they looking for? That's a question that still has no answer, because if Keegan Klein had never been considered a serious suspect in the Delphi murders, if law enforcement truly believed he had nothing to do with it, then why, after all this time, were they suddenly searching near his home for what appeared to be crucial evidence? The timing alone raises even more questions. For years, investigators had ignored Klein's connection to Liberty German. They let him slide through the fingers of investigators. Yet in 2022, they were suddenly digging through a riverbed for something he might have hidden? This doesn't seem to add up. If the search was unrelated to Delphi, then why didn't law enforcement make that clear? Why didn't they tell the public what they were looking for? At least by now. They had never been shy about releasing updates in the case before, but now when it came to searching an area connected to Keegan Klein, they were silent. If the search was connected to Delphi, then that's an even bigger problem, because if investigators were, in fact, searching for a weapon, a phone, or another piece of physical evidence related to the murders, then it means they had serious doubts about the person they were about to arrest. Keep in mind, if somebody threw a phone, a weapon, a knife, a box cutter in that river, well, You know, if you know anything about the Midwest, you get some weather every year. And we're talking many summers and winters having gone through probably quite a bit of flooding on and off in that very river. You're probably not going to find anything out there that many years later. Good try, though. Maybe you should have thought of that when you looked at her phone and found this guy on it. And then you could trace that back to him being in your town and maybe look at the riverbed right away. I don't know. That's just me. I'm not an investigator. I just talk about this stuff. I think most people would probably run to that conclusion. It's even like below Nancy Drew level. 1 month later, in October of 2022, Richard Allen was charged with the Delphi murders. You know, because they didn't find that box cutter 5-6 years after the murders took place. Surprise, we got to get somebody here. Otherwise, we're going to look like a bunch of buffoons. Yeah, you kind of are. And just like that, the search of the Wabash River was never mentioned again. Whatever they were looking for, whatever they may or may not have found, it was seemingly wiped from the investigation the moment Allen walked into custody. Literally, you know, walked into custody. Klein's name was pushed aside. His connection to Liberty was no longer considered relevant, and the police acted as if the search had never happened at all. Nothing to see here. If Klein was never a suspect, then what was this search about? And if he was a suspect, why was he allowed to fade into the background the moment police found someone else to charge? The fact that this search even happened proves one thing. Law enforcement was still unsure about the case, even 5 years later. And the fact that they buried it just as quickly proves something else. They didn't want the public to know just what the public, just how much they had second-guessed themselves. That's a bad look. Even though it's taken all these years and we've really kind of have a lot of suspects here that seem to be possibly involved, maybe even together. But again, nothing to see here. The Wabash River search should have led to more questions, more answers, and more investigations. Instead, it led to Richard Allen's arrest, and Keegan Klein was quietly erased from the story. By the time Richard Allen's trial began in October of 24, the narrative of the Delphi murders had been set in stone. The prosecution walked into the courtroom ready to close the case, painting Allen as the man responsible for the deaths of Abby Williams and Liberty German. They had their timeline, they had their evidence, they had a jury that had been primed to believe that they had the right guy. And yet, there was one name missing from the prosecution's case. That name would be Keegan Klein, the man who had been directly communicating with Liberty German before her death, the man whose chat logs suggested a possible meeting with her, the man who had been running a massive online exploitation scheme preying on underage girls, including Liberty, through a fake persona. The jury didn't hear a word of that. Nada. It's like it never even happened. Has nothing to do with the case. Somehow Klein's name was never mentioned by the prosecution. Somehow. The state's entire argument revolved around Richard Allen, the man who had no known digital connection to Liberty or Abby, a man whose only physical tie to the crime scene was that single bullet, a man who, for 5 years, had been completely off the radar of this investigation. That single bullet, by the way, also, again, I gotta stress, never truly connected him to the crime scene. Someone said, "This must belong to you." He says, "No, it doesn't." Prove it. And they really couldn't prove it. So just put yourself in that situation for a second. This must belong to you. No, that's not mine. Well, there's writing on this pad. Don't you write on pads? Oh, yes, I do write on notepads. Well, then it's yours. It must be yours. Case closed. That's essentially what happened. It makes sense in Delphi, I guess. Allen's defense team saw the problem here. They saw the gaps. They saw the ignored evidence. They saw how law enforcement had spent years chasing the wrong people while sitting on real digital proof that Liberty had been talking to a predator before she died. And they made a move that should have changed everything. They called Keegan Klein as a witness. At first, it seemed like the trial was about to take a major turn. Klein, who had spent years evading real scrutiny in this case, was finally going to be able to finally going to be forced to speak under oath. Finally going to be confronted with his shifting stories, his digital footprint, and his role in Liberty's final hours. The court even ordered him to be transported from prison to testify. But then, as everything goes in Delphi, nothing happened. Klein was on the witness list, but he never took the stand. No testimony, no cross-examination, no moment of reckoning, just not like he's even part of this. And no one ever explained why. There's a few possibilities, none of them good. First, the judge may have placed restrictions on what Klein could say, and if the defense wanted to use him to question the integrity of the police investigation, but the court limited how much of that could be brought up, then calling him might have been pointless. And if you know anything about Judge Gall, she doesn't like any fingers pointed in a direction that she doesn't think that they should be going. Really impartial like that. The second, the prosecution may have cut a deal with Klein to keep him quiet. If there was any risk that he would say something that could shift suspicion back onto himself, or worse, reveal how badly law enforcement handled their investigation, they may have found a way to ensure he never spoke in front of a jury. Third, the defense may have realized Klein was too unpredictable to be useful. He'd already proven in multiple interrogations that he could dodge questions with ease, that he could twist the truth just enough to cast doubt without actually incriminating himself. And if the defense believed putting him on the stand would cause more confusion than clarity, then they may have decided it wasn't worth the risk. But no matter the reason, the outcome was the same. The jury never got to hear from the one man who was actively in contact with Liberty German before she was murdered. Instead, they were told to focus on Richard Allen. And when the verdict finally came down, it was Allen, not Klein, who was convicted of the Delphi murders. And just like that, Klein once again slipped out of the spotlight. Once again, he avoided the scrutiny he should have faced from the very beginning. And once again, law enforcement got to pretend that his role in the case didn't matter. But it does. Because no matter how many times they try to erase his name from the story, Keegan Klein remains the biggest unanswered question in the Delphi murders. Keegan Klein has never been charged in the Delphi murders, nor for conspiracy, not for accessory, not for obstruction, not for anything. Despite the mountain of digital evidence linking him to Liberty German, despite chat logs suggesting of a planned meeting, despite his own admission that he was behind the Anthony Shots profile, he has never once been officially accused of playing a role in the murders. Instead, Richard Allen, a man with no known digital connection to Liberty or Abby, was convicted and sent to prison for the crime for the rest of his life. And if that doesn't sit right with you, it shouldn't. Because when you compare the case built against both men, it's Klein, not Allen, who had the stronger circumstantial evidence against him. From the very beginning, law enforcement had concrete proof that Klein had been in contact with Liberty. He wasn't a vague suspect with no ties to victims. He wasn't a name pulled off of a police tip line. He was actively messaging one of the girls before she was murdered. There were no text messages, no social media conversations, no digital evidence at all linking Richard Allen to Liberty German. There were chat logs, metadata, and documented pattern of predatory behavior connecting Keegan Klein to Liberty German, though. Yet Allen was charged, Klein wasn't. So how does that happen? How does a case like this get built around a man who wasn't talking to the victims, while a man who was talking to the victims is left completely out of the equation? It's simple. Law enforcement needed an easy conviction. They needed to find a suspect that they could put in front of a jury, someone whose name wasn't tangled up in years of police failures and ignored evidence. Someone who wouldn't bring attention to the mistakes they made in the early years of the investigation. Keegan Klein, too complicated, and it makes us look really, really dumb. His involvement raised too many questions. His presence in the case would have forced police to explain why they ignored the chat logs for years. It would have forced them to admit that they had failed. One of the biggest leads in examining the biggest lead in the case in 2017 and did nothing with it. said they built a case around Richard Allen. And the biggest sign that they knew their case was wrong, the Wabash River search. Because if law enforcement was so certain that Allen was their guy, why just weeks before his arrest were they still digging near Keegan Klein's home for possible murder evidence? If the case against Allen was airtight, why did they suddenly need to search a river 5 years after the fact looking for something they wouldn't even disclose to the public? The answer's obvious. They had doubts. They had many doubts. And instead of following those doubts, instead of stepping back and reconsidering the path they were on, what did they do? They charged Allen anyway, because that was the easier thing to do, because that gave them an answer, whether it was right or not. And because charging Keegan Klein would have meant admitting that they had let him got away with this for years. So here we are, one man convicted, one man forgotten, and a case that still doesn't feel solved. Richard Allen has been convicted, the case, at least in the eyes of law enforcement. But is it really? Because as it stands right now, as it stands at this moment, Keegan Klein is still sitting in prison, not for the Delphi murders, not for anything related to Liberty German, but for child exploitation charges completely unrelated to this case. And if the prison food doesn't kill him first, he will get out. And that should bother everyone. Keegan Klein wasn't some random figure in this investigation. He wasn't the man police discovered years later through new forensic evidence. He was there from the very beginning. His fake persona luring in underage girls, his digital footprint showing direct communication with Liberty. His name should have never left the list of prime suspects. But instead of treating him like the obvious lead he was, police chose to ignore, delay, and ultimately push him out of the picture altogether. He still denies any involvement to this day. He's never been charged with anything connected to the murders, never been forced to answer why his fake account was still active the day Liberty vanished. Or he was, but he doesn't remember. Or he doesn't know. Or I don't think so. Or that's a lie. Those are his answers. And they were just accepted. Never been held accountable for his role leading up to this and leading her into an online trap, one that may have ultimately led to murder. But by who? Maybe that's one of the biggest questions still to this day and one of the biggest failures of all of this, because here's what we still don't know. What did police find in the Wabash River, and why did they go there when they spent weeks searching near Klein's home in 2022? Why was Klein ordered to be transported to testify at Richard Allen's trial only to never take the stand? Will he ever be charged for involvement with Liberty German? Have to walk back Richard Allen's conviction before that. Did law enforcement let the real killer walk free in favor of an easier target? I am not saying Keegan Klein is the killer. I'm saying he certainly has more information. They would say there's no coincidences. Well, this isn't a coincidence. This is just blaringly obvious evidence directly in front of you. There's no scenario where Keegan Klein should have been ignored as completely as he was. The evidence against him was right there from the beginning, and yet police chose a different path, one that conveniently kept the focus away from their biggest investigative mistake. And until those questions are answered, this case will never be truly solved. Because one thing remains abundantly clear. The Delphi police have never explained why they ignored the strongest lead they ever had. And that's just one piece of this story. And believe it or not a very big piece, but a very key piece if you're trying to really understand the whole thing and try to find that real piece of evidence that does connect someone to this in a real tangible way. this is a pretty strong one in terms of digital footprint. There's a lot in this case. You can find it all over our channel. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you're watching us or listening to us right now so you don't miss any of our continuing coverage on this case. It is not going to go away. I'm Tony Bruschi. Thank you for listening.
The latest true crime stories, expert breakdowns, and shocking twists, all in one place. Press subscribe now to the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.